We are doing a weekly read of Clive Barker's A to Z of Horror. M for Mistress of the Night. I like this artwork a lot. I might get a tattoo of this one. Idea pile. And for Mistress of the Night. Truly effective horror cuts you in half, to use a nice dismemberment metaphor, and then pulls you apart. Ambivalence is at the heart of horror. Things that are gruesome can also be strangely compelling. Half of you wants to look or to know, and the other half doesn't. One response is about pleasure and the other about pain, and it is the business of horror to put the two in touch with each other. The British-born actress Barbara Steele has a face, a look unlike anyone else in movies. Most of her Italian-made horror movies, in fact, all of her movies, are modern-day cults. She does what few actresses are capable of doing. She lets you see both destruction and delight in the same pair of eyes. Once you see Barbara Steele, you know you will never forget her, says director Tim Burton. She is probably one of the only real horror goddesses. There is a timelessness that she has. Roger Corman, who directed the actress in Pit and the Pendulum, agrees. There was a depth to her. On the surface, she was a beautiful brunette woman. Beneath that, and you could almost get poetic here, looking into her eyes, you could see layer upon layer. I could probably best inadequately describe it as a kind of exotic mystery. According to J. Arthur Rank publicity sources, Barbara Steele was born at Birkenhead near Liverpool on 29 December 1937. However, most sources list her birth date as 1938, and the actress herself has said, I was born in Ireland on the same day as Fellini, but not the same year. I am therefore a Capricorn. Her professional stage debut came in a comedy opposite Robert Morley in the mid-1950s, and she appeared in a number of repertory parts before she was spotted in John Van Gruber's Bell, Book, and Candle, and put under long-term contract by the Rank organization. Her first Rank film was the light comedy Bachelor of Hearts, which quickly followed by roles in the color remake of 39 Steps, Upstairs and Downstairs, Sapphire, aka Operation Scotland Yard, and Your Money or Your Wife. When Rank sold her contract to 20th Century Fox, the actress moved to Hollywood. It was an unhappy period for Steele. The studio said she was too big and she should change her hair color, and she spent most of her time sitting on the beach waiting for the phone to ring. That's how I came to the States, she recalls, but I don't know why the studio got it into its head to make me a blonde, but this is something that they did. I felt like a total lie as a blonde because it didn't suit my nature, which is pretty dark, and I said to myself, I'm out of here. The bleached blonde actress spent 3 days working on Don Siegel's Elvis Presley movie, Flaming Star, before she fled to Europe and replaced in the picture by Barbara Eden. I found myself in Rome and was wildly grateful to be in Italy, she says. It felt right. I felt centered. I felt embraced and adored. I find it very interesting that in this great period of phenomenal optimism in Italy, these horror movies came out because the dark side is always going back to express itself somewhere. And the kickoff was Black Sunday. Side quote, the face of Steele explains why her mere presence suffices to trigger the perverse but fundamental and pleasurable fantasies that form the raw material of the horror genre itself, and why her image, more than any other, is the emblem of the fetish of the genre. The Aurum Film Encyclopedia Horror, edited by Phil Hart. Directed by the great Italian stylist Mario Bava, Black Sunday starred Steele in the dual roles of Asa, a resurrected vampire witch, and her innocent descendant, Princess Katia. She played the sexy witch, remembers Joe Dante, who directed the actress in Piranha. He did a lot of smoldering, basically, which was just the thing for kids who were beginning to get interested in sets, but were still more interested in monsters. And Barbara was a sexy monster, so it was sort of okay. There was always a high level of sexuality in every horror film, says Steele, because we were dealing with death and very primal things, and we've always got to have this juxtaposition of a subtext, but a very powerful sexual subtext. Whatever is going on. I mean, you try and invest it with a kind of force. After appearing opposite Vincent Price in the American production Pit and the Pendulum, the actress went on to make a string of horror films in Italy. She already had a bit of a cult following when she came to us with Paul's Roger Corman. I think she went back to Italy afterwards. Those were days of tremendous activity in Rome, and she was a major star for that kind of filming. Directors such as Ricardo Freda and Antonio Margheriti were quick to capitalize upon her distinctive features, and they cast her in a number of similar parts. I usually played these roles where I represented the dark side, explained Steele. I was always a predatory bitch goddess in all these movies, with all kinds of unspeakable elements of necrophilia and rising from the dead and perpetuating curses. The women that I played were usually very powerful women, and they suffered for it. You saw these powerful women, usually adulteresses, full of lust and greed, playing out all this repressed stuff, and then in the end, I always seemed to get it. And there was always this sort of morality play, this sort of final payoff. And that was very consoling to everybody, because the dark goddess can't just go on wreaking hubris and havoc ad infinitum. She gets her comeuppance too. We have an aside. Black Sunday. Original La Maschera del Demonio, UK, Revenge of the Vampire, The Mask of Satan. Italy, 1960, director Mario Bava with Barbara Steele, with John Richardson, Andrea Cecchi, Ivo Barani, Arturo Dominici, Enrico Olivieri, Galatea, Jolly American International Black and White. Based on Nikolai Gogol's story, The Vij, British actress Barbara Steele became a cult star in the dual roles of heroine Princess Katya and Asa, a 17th century witch accidentally released from her tomb by a drop of blood, with the aid of her vampire helper, Dominici. She plans to replace Katya, who is her exact double. Atmospherically photographed by co-writer director Bava, this begins with a memorable scene in which a spiked mask is hammered onto Asa's face. The American version replaced Roberto Nicolosi's movie score with an inferior one by Les Baxter. It was banned in Britain until 1968, when it was finally released in a cut version. Barbara Steele extraordinary. In The Ghost, her eyes are metaphysical, unreal, impossible, like the eyes of a Chirico painting. There are times in certain conditions of light and color when her face assumes a cast that doesn't appear to be quite human, which would be impossible for any other actress. Ricardo Freda. We would have The Ghost. What I think these films do is they basically fill you with a psychic dread and they address the soul, says Tim Burton. When I was younger, my parents boarded up my room. I had two big windows and they boarded them up like a small kind of slit window. After seeing movies like Pit and the Pendulum, and you see her eyes glaring out of the Iron Maiden, I can certainly relate to that, looking out my window and feeling trapped. I always found those Italian horror films actually made me feel psychologically comfortable. There's something about her in those films that taps into the unconscious and makes you actually feel better about the abstractions of life. According to Joe Dante, a number of the pictures that Barbara made in the 60s, like The Ghost, Castle of Blood, and The Long Hair of Death, although they played double bills at drive-ins and movie houses, they were a little more sexually daring than certainly domestic pictures. Even though most of them had been re-edited before they got to America, it was very difficult to take out all of the undertones of necrophilia and lesbianism. Castle of Blood was quite a scandal when it opened in Rome because of its lesbian love scene with Paul's director, Antonio Margheriti. But she did it without making any fuss. I liked doing all those scenes and then had those forbidden aspects to them. She admits necrophilia, incest, all those violent kinds of repressed emotions. I liked that a lot. I think that's a really great arena to work in. Despite her appearance in such films as Federico Fellini's critically acclaimed 8.5 and Wolfgang Vorndorf's Young Tortoise, the quality of the horror movie still appeared and gradually began to deteriorate. Even her co-starring role opposite those maestros of menace, Boris Karloff, Christopher Lee, and Michael Gow, couldn't save the British maid Curse of the Crimson Altar. We've got some sides. Bava was like a ghost, a man in silent shoes. I could barely feel his presence. Margheriti was exactly the opposite, very assertive, emotional, and aggressive. With Freda, I had an instinctive emotional rapport. Freda is very seductive and intimate with his actors. The roles I did with Freda were very emotional. Barbara Steele. The Horrible Dr. Hypock. Italy, 1962, director Robert Hampton, Ricardo Freda, with Barbara Steele, Robert Fleming, Montgomery Glenn, Teresa Fitzgerald, Harriet White, Spencer Williams, Canada Film Color. A minor classic shot in only 8 days, English actor Fleming plays the eponymous turn-of-the-century scientist who is only sexually aroused by necrophilia. After he accidentally kills his first wife with an overdose of drugs during sex, his new wife Cynthia is menaced by her ghostly predecessor, who has returned from the grave seeking love. Director Freda uses the color photography to create some wonderful images, and still has never looked better as the much put upon heroine. Some prints include scenes of Fleming fondling the bodies of dead women, which were cut from the film's original release in both Britain and America. We have a list of selected films of Barbara Steele. Quote, Barbara is very good in horror films. She has a very magical presence and a very charismatic face. Antonio Nevinette. The producers, Steele told a magazine at the time, they have completely false image of me, I think. Once and for all, they've cast me as a sorceress. People are intellectually very lazy. They prefer not to change the image they have of me. What is one to do? In 1974, after a 4-year absence from the screen, she made her comeback as the sadistic warden in Cage 2, a slice of women in prison exploitation that marked the directorial debut of screenwriter Jonathan Demme. She went on to appear in David Cronenberg's feature review Shivers, Joe Dante's Piranha, and Louis Millet's Pretty Baby. According to Dante, in the 70s, I think Barbara found herself being cast by people like David Cronenberg, Jonathan Demme, and me because we had all seen her when we were growing up, but she had made an indelible impression on us that a lot of her contemporaries didn't. Everybody wanted to chat with me about my 60s horror films, said Steele, and I just couldn't talk about it. I was in total denial about them. I pushed them all aside because I felt they had tripped me up in terms of working and didn't want to deal with them. I didn't want anyone to love me for horror movies. These days, Barbara Steele is more comfortable about that period in her career. She teamed up with Dan Curtis and served as a producer on the popular ABC TV miniseries The Winds of War and War and Remembrance, and returned to the horror genre in the 90s as Dr. Julia Hoffman in Curtis's briefly revived vampire TV series Dark Shadows. However, she is still surprised by the fan following her horror films' command. I've met a lot of my fans, and a lot of them are completely charming, but I don't know what it is I represent to them. It's a mystery to me. I can only imagine that they sense something in me, and maybe that they sense is some kind of psychic pain, some kind of childhood grief, some kind of isolation, some unresolved pain. It's funny that people see it as a kind of scary and dark and psychotic system burden, when in fact everybody has that duality. The healthiest people are the ones who explore it. She's had the opportunity to do that on film, which is a really healthy way of doing it. She's got an incredible strength and yet a mystery, which is something you don't learn in acting school. It's just something you have or you don't have, and she has it. Well, she has a great otherworldly quality, her bone structure, her face, the way of movement. I was struck by it and used it as much as I possibly could. Roger Corman. Quote, the horrors are the only films one hears about, which is a drag. I always used to think they'd end up only in Sicily. It's not so. They end up at the Marble Arch, Odeon in London, while the things you did for love and nothing end up in late night showings at the Tokyo Film Festival. Barbara Steele. And that was M for Mistress of the Night. Next week, we have N for Nightmare. Oh, peak. Yep, it is exactly what we think it's about. So thank you for reading with me. I will see you next week for N for Nightmare.